Hello, my name is David Miller. I have 48 years and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. Or rather, lived. For almost my entire life, I have been a convinced atheist. Not the angry or militant kind, but the logical, calm type who believes in the power of reason. I taught philosophy at a respected university, participated in debates, published articles on the illusion of religious faith. To me, God was just an invention, something people cling to when they can't deal with the unpredictability of life. I prided myself on my logic. I prided myself on my skepticism. I firmly believed that when we die, everything simply ends. Darkness, silence, end. But on the day, November 12th, everything I believed in fell apart. It was a Thursday night. I had stayed up late grading papers, drinking a lot of coffee as usual. Around 2 in the morning, I felt a strange pressure in my chest. I thought it was stress or maybe just indigestion. I got up to get a glass of water, and that's when everything went dark. I fell right there, on the kitchen floor. No warning, no goodbyes, just silence. According to the paramedics, my heart stopped 22 minutes. They tried everything: cardiac massage, defibrillator, adrenaline. My body was clinically dead. No beats, no breathing, no brain activity. But I remember everything. Not like a dream, not as a delusion. It was more real than anything I've ever experienced. I remember floating, at first, just a few inches above my body. I saw myself lying there, the broken glass on the floor, the kitchen light flickering, and the rescuer's voice, "We're losing him." I didn't feel afraid. In fact, I didn't feel anything, just confusion, disconnection, and then something pulled me hard. I thought I would see that famous white light, or angels, or perhaps nothingness. But what came next was something I could never imagine, and that changed everything. At that moment when I was pulled, everything around me began to disappear. The kitchen, the sound of voices, even my own body, everything fell apart, as if it had never existed. I was thrown into a dark space, but it wasn't just the absence of light. It was a living darkness, dense, almost palpable, a darkness that watched me. There was no floor, there was no sky, just me and nothingness. At first I tried to rationalize. It must be the brain's last electrical discharge, but little by little I realized that this was not an illusion. It was real, very real. And then came the sounds, whispers, distant screams, sarcastic laughter mixed with muffled cries. It was as if hundreds of voices were echoing inside my mind, reminding me of everything I said with so much certainty. God does not exist. Death is the end. Faith is an emotional crutch. It was as if the universe was confronting me. Even worse, I started to feel a deep anguish, an existential void like never before. It was as if all the certainties that had sustained me my entire life were now sinking me. There was no time there, but I swear I was stuck in that place for an eternity. I started to ask myself, what if I'm wrong? That's when something even stranger appeared, a feeling of presence. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. Something gigantic, incomprehensible, as if a being was watching me from the other side of that veil of darkness. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't comfort either. It was true, raw, absolute, relentless. And for the first time in my life, something inside me, it broke. I, David Miller, atheist, professor, intellectual, began to cry, not out of fear, but from repentance. I remembered every time I ridiculed someone for believing in something bigger. I remembered the students who left my classes with less faith than they had when they entered. And there, alone in the middle of nowhere, my arrogance turned to dust. Without knowing why or how, I said, "If there is anyone out there, listen to me, please. I don't want to die like this." And at that very moment, the darkness began to open. The darkness began to slowly open, as if an invisible veil was being torn in front of me. It wasn't sudden, it was almost respectful, as if something was watching me, assessing whether I was ready for what came next. One corridor appeared, far away, narrow, dark. But this time, there was something different. At the end of it, a faint, almost timid light flickered like a candle flame in the distance. I started walking, or rather, I started be taken. I had no control over my body. It was as if I were gliding through space, guided by a force that knew me better than I knew myself. As he advanced, the voices became clearer. They didn't scream anymore. Now whispered names, moments, words, and they all had something in common. They were mine. I heard my father saying, "I'm disappointed." I heard my ex-wife crying alone in the room after another cold argument. I heard the mocking laugh I gave when a student spoke about purpose, about soul, about forgiveness. And then I started to see images projected on the invisible walls of that corridor. Each one was a fragment of my life, but not as I remembered. It was as if I was watching from the point of view of the people I hurt, the people I ignored, the people I pushed away with my arrogance disguised as rationality. I felt every emotion they felt, every pain, every loneliness caused by my pride. And me, I couldn't run away. This isn't punishment, I thought. It's a revelation. That's when I realized I wasn't in hell in the religious sense. There was no fire, demons, or punishment. What was there was something much more devastating. A true, raw undress. No excuses. I continued advancing. The light ahead was now brighter, and for the first time I felt heat. Not physical, but something that involved the soul. A forgotten memory of something I never knew, or that perhaps I had buried for so long that I no longer knew it existed. Love, but not romantic, conditional, human love, was an absolute love, which did not demand perfection from me, but honesty. I started crying again, but this time, not with regret. It was something different, something I had never felt in my entire skeptical life. Hope. The light called me, and deep down, a part of me knew. It was the beginning of something much bigger. I continued heading toward the light, but something inside me began to tremble. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper, a feeling that even after recognizing my mistakes, I still was not worthy from that place. The light didn't stop growing. It wasn't blinding, but it was so pure that I felt like I was being dismissal inside. Every memory, every hidden thought, every lie I told myself, everything came to the surface. And then, she said, but not with words. It was as if light passed through me and implanted a thought directly into the center of my consciousness. "You know me, but you never recognized me." That broke me. It wasn't an accusation. It was a gentle truth, but firm. A presence that knew me completely, and yet remained there. It was at that moment that I collapsed. I screamed, but it was no ordinary cry of despair. It was something primal, a cry of the soul. "Pardon me. If you are real, please give me another chance. I don't want to go back because of the pain, but to say that I was wrong. Let me fix it." I had never prayed. Never. But that was a prayer without a formula. It was the surrender of someone who spent his life trying to prove that God was a delusion, and now begged him not to be one. And then, everything stopped. Absolute silence. The light retreated a little, as if it were looking at me in silence, and I felt something I can't explain logically. An infinite compassion, as if, even knowing everything I did, the answer was yes. Yes, there was forgiveness. Yes, there was love. Yes, there was purpose, even for me. At that moment, I began to feel a new energy surrounding me, something that prepared me for what came next, and a phrase echoed inside me with overwhelming force: "You were never alone." I started sobbing, alone in that space between worlds. Between life and death, I, the skeptic, the analytical, the rational, was struck by something that no argument could explain. Faith. But this faith was not blind. It was alive. It was a certainty without proof. It was his presence inside me. And so I was led to the center of the light. The light enveloped me completely. It was no ordinary light. It didn't come from a specific point. It was everything. She crossed me, but at the same time it seemed support me. And the more I surrendered, the more I realized that light, it was a conscience, a presence, immeasurable, infinite. It had no face, it had no form, but I knew with a certainty that could not be put into words. That was God, but not the God I ridiculed in my classes, not a punitive, limited human figure. It was something beyond everything my mind has ever tried to conceive. It was a love so absolute that it hurt. It hurt because it revealed how far I had lived away from him and how much he never walked away from me. At that moment, there was no time, no space, no ego. I was just consciousness, a drop dipped in the ocean of the divine. And yet, He spoke to me, not with words, but with instant truths. Every thought that arose in me was answered before it even formed. He knew everything about me, even the thoughts that I never dared to confess to anyone. And still, he loved me. I felt a pain that was not physical but spiritual, the pain of having lived a lifetime ignoring the source of everything. And then he showed me something, like a living canvas, a kind of cosmic memory opened up before me. It wasn't just my actions, but their effects. Every word I said, every gesture, every choice, everything echoed in waves that affected lives that I never met. I saw a student who gave up his faith after watching one of my lectures. Years later, this same student fell into depression, became separated from his family, and tried to take his own life. I started to shake, but then I saw another scene, an elderly woman in line for a coffee shop, who one day I let pass in front of me without thinking much about it. She turned to me and said, "Thank you that kindness still exists." Days later, I discovered that she was about to give up on life. That simple gesture was what changed her mind, and I understood. Nothing is small in the eyes of God. He didn't show me to punish me, but for me to teach, to show me that every life matters, that every moment has a purpose. And then, like a silent explosion, the presence said to me, "You have a choice." Do you believe that God can speak to someone even after death? Have you ever experienced something that challenged everything you believed in? Share in the comments. Your story could touch someone today. When I heard the phrase, "You have a choice," something in me shuddered. I expected an imposition, a final judgment, a sentence, but instead I was welcomed with freedom. And then, everything around me began to dissolve, and a new dimension opened up before my eyes. It was not a place, but a total experience, where past, present, and future intertwined. Suddenly, I was inside my own life, but not as a souvenir. It was like I was reliving every moment, only now with other people's feelings too. It started in childhood. I saw my father calling me to play after a long day at work. I said no. I preferred the video game. At the time, I thought it meant nothing, but now I felt his heart tightening, trying to hide the sadness in his smile. I went through the days when I was sarcastic with colleagues, arrogant with teachers, cold with my mother. Everything seemed small at the time. But now I understood that they were like invisible cuts on the people around me. Every word, every gesture, every absence, everything had eternal weight. And then came the moments that marked me the most. The time I met Emily, my ex-wife, the sparkle in her eyes, the plans for a life together, the dreams she shared with me. Dreams that I treated as emotional weaknesses. I remembered the time she cried silently, lying in bed, and I turned over pretending to sleep. I saw that again now, but feeling what she felt, the abandonment, the loneliness. And then I saw my daughter, who barely knew me. I saw the time she drew me with a heart on my chest and wrote, "Daddy, come home." That image stuck with me. I cried so much that I didn't know if I was still in the experience or if I had already returned to my body. But then something unexpected came. I saw moments that seemed insignificant but now gained shine. The smile I gave to a lonely lady on the subway. The day I helped a student overcome an anxiety attack without realizing it. The moment I held the elevator door for someone with their hands full. Little seeds that I never imagined would generate anything. The presence showed me all of this with a wisdom that was impossible to explain. She didn't condemn me, just me revealed. It was as if he were saying, "Everything matters. Every choice is a chance to love or to hurt, to build or destroy, and you had both." The intensity of this truth was too much. I fell to my knees, or what was left of me there, and I repeated, "I am not worthy." But the answer came like a powerful breeze. "You never were, but I am, and I choose you anyway." In that instant, everything changed inside me. All the logic that guided me for decades bowed before a greater wisdom. I wasn't before a judge, I was before a father, and for the first time I wanted to live not for myself but for something bigger than me. After I saw the movie of my life, I thought it would all end there. That revelation would be the final point. But no, the presence in which I now fearlessly called God wasn't finished yet. He led me to a place that was pure light. It was like being inside a heart that pulsed love in every particle of space. There were no walls, there was no sky, just presence and truth. And then, he spoke to me more clearly than ever before, not with a voice, but with an internal impression so strong, so clear, that there was no way to doubt it. The message came as a peace clash, as if he placed an entire universe inside my chest. You were never separate from me. I was in every question, in every doubt, in every hidden tear. I was in the silence. I was in the scream. I was with you even when you denied my name. Because my love does not depend on your faith, it is. I couldn't react. Everything they taught me about religion seemed small compared to that. It was as if, for the first time, I understood the truth behind all beliefs. God is not a concept. God is live relationship. He doesn't want to be feared. He wants to be known. Does not want blind obedience, but deep intimacy. I thought about how many times I argued against his existence, ridiculing those who believed. And now here I was, not just before him, but inside him, being loved completely. And then he showed me the world, not with images, but with an absolute feeling of connection, as if I could touch the pain of every person alive at that moment. I felt the suffering of mothers crying for children, of young people in crisis, of people screaming for meaning. And he said, "You will come back." The sentence tore me up inside. I didn't want to. I didn't want to leave that peace, that love, that light. But then he added, "You will come back to tell what you saw. You will live to love, and you will testify that I am real and that I am good." It was as if he was placing a purpose within me, not imposed but confident. And as much as everything in me wanted to stay, I replied, "If this is going to transform lives, send it to me." And at that moment, I felt like I was being pulled again, but not with violence. It was like coming back from an eternal embrace, like being released from eternity for an instant. The light was fading, presence moving away tenderly, and the last words I heard before waking up were, "You were not chosen because you were strong, but because you were sincere." And then, the feeling of being ripped away from that place was indescribable. It wasn't pain, but a kind of spiritual mourning. As if, in leaving God's presence, I left behind not just a place, but a full version of myself. I was pulled gently but firmly, and as the light receded, something remained. A seed inside me. A mission. God didn't just let me go back. He sent me. On the way back, there were no images, no sounds, just a pure conscience. And it was then that doubt hit me hard. Will I remember everything when I wake up? What if they think I'm crazy? What if my life no longer has room for this? But immediately I felt an answer, not in words, but in clarity. You will remember, and the world will listen. At that moment I started to hear something, a whistle, coming from far away like a siren cutting through the silence of eternity. Then, voices, agitated, in English, quick, techniques. It returned. He's back. 22 minutes, oh my God. My eyes opened. The hospital light blinded me for a moment. Everything seemed confusing. Tubes, machines, doctors running. I didn't know if I was alive or if I was still part of the experience. But one thing was clear. I had returned. And the feeling was twofold. A part of me cried with joy. I cried with longing. The first person I saw was a nurse. She looked at me as if she had seen a ghost. And at that moment, before I could even speak, a tear fell from my eye. She held my hand and said, You've been dead for over 20 minutes. I looked at her and replied, I know. I was hospitalized for days. The doctors couldn't understand. No brain damage, no sequels. It was like I had just slow and returned. But inside me, nothing was like before. And it was there in that hospital room, looking out the window at a world that now seemed completely new, that the choice was given to me again. Forget and move on as if nothing had happened, or live each day with an eternal purpose. I chose to live, but not for me, no more. I chose to live for him. In the days following my return, my body felt the same, but my soul didn't. I remember lying in the hospital bed, observing banal details like the texture of the wall, the distant sound of machines, the reflection of sunlight in the window, and everything seemed sacred. The nurses came in, measured my blood pressure, smiled, and I looked at each one as if I were seeing a human being in its entirety for the first time, as if each person carried within them a spark of the same light that surrounded me in that other place. On the third day of hospitalization, a doctor called Dr. Ethan Collins. He entered the room with a tone between curious and cautious. He examined me in silence and after a few seconds said something that I will never forget. "David, statistically, you shouldn't be here, and definitely not completely lucid. But here you are. Can you explain to me what happened?" I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I spoke out loud. "I died, and God brought me back." He looked at me for a few seconds. Didn't laugh, he didn't mock, just said, "Tell me what you saw." And I did. Not everything, and it wasn't ready yet, but enough for him to understand that it wasn't a delusion. It was real. The days passed. I received visits from colleagues, distant family members, even from the university. Everyone brought flowers, generic words, curious looks, but I saw something in their eyes. Fear. Afraid that the logical man, atheist, implacable, had lost his sanity. Rumors began to circulate. David had a meltdown. Maybe his brain suffered invisible damage. He's using this to get attention. But none of these phrases spoke to me, because now I knew the truth. When I was discharged, I sat in the back seat of the car and looked at the city with different eyes. People walking hurriedly, mothers pulling children, couples arguing, a man sitting on the sidewalk with his head down. Each face was a universe. Each life is an opportunity to encounter God. And then I understood something that hit me like a whisper straight to my soul. The miracle wasn't that I came back. The miracle is that I'm here, now. Returning to my apartment was strange. Everything looked the same. The books, the notes, the computer, my favorite mug. But nothing made sense without God anymore, not center. I spent hours looking at my bookshelf full of works that denied the divine existence. Each author, each thesis, each argument, they all now seemed insufficient compared to what I experienced. And there, in that same room where my heart stopped weeks before, I knelt. Alone. No cameras, no audience, no answers. And he said, "God, I don't know how to start, but I'm here, and now I'm yours." My life in the eyes of the world seemed to have returned to normal, but inside, I had been born again. In the days following my return, I realized how much my mind tried, uselessly, to fit that experience into logic. I found myself several times trying to rationalize, look for scientific terms, neurological explanations, phenomena linked to cerebral hypoxia, but it was useless. The experience I lived, it didn't fit into any theory. She didn't need proof because it was greater than any explanation. It was living truth. The first week after discharge, I returned to the university for a meeting with the board. They wanted to understand what was happening. I was a respected professor, a known skeptic, a reference in existential philosophy. In the room were 3 old colleagues, the dean and a psychologist from the institution. They asked me how I was, and I said calmly, "I'm alive, but I'm not the same anymore." Silence. They looked at me like I was on the verge of a breakdown. Then the dean said, "David, we've received reports from concerned students. Some say you had a mystical vision." I smiled, took a deep breath and replied, "It wasn't a vision, it was real, and it changed everything." The psychologist suggested I take some time off, medical recess. "You've been through trauma," she said. But that wasn't trauma. It was a miracle. In the following days, I tried to teach, but something inside me stopped me. How could I talk about Nietzsche, Sartre, Dawkins, and so many others as if they were holders of the truth, when I had known the truth itself in the form of light? I wasn't there to confront anyone, not even to impose faith. I just wanted to say, there is more, much more. And it was then that I made the most difficult decision of my life. Resign. I left behind the salary, the prestige, the applause. I picked up my box of books and left with a peace I never felt in that institution. Little by little, I started writing about what I experienced. At first, it was just for me, but later I opened a YouTube channel. I recorded my first shaking video. I was an atheist for 30 years. I died, and God gave me a new life. Within a week, the video had thousands of views, comments of all types. People saying I was crazy, people saying they finally understood that they weren't alone, people crying, sharing, doubting. But deep down, I wasn't trying to convince anyone. I just wanted to testify. Today I spend my days writing, speaking, listening to people, and mainly loving, because the only certainty I brought from there is that love is the language of God, and not the love that judges, but what welcomes, teaches, forgives, heals. This was, and still is, the biggest transformation of my life. Stop living to prove reason and start living to spread compassion. Not everyone welcomed my transformation. After my video went viral, the response was overwhelming and contradictory. Thousands of people have written to me with moving stories. People saying, "I saw the light too. I died and came back. You put into words what I lived in silence for years." But along with love came attack. Atheist websites started publishing articles with my name. Teacher goes crazy after cardiac arrest. Former intellectual indulges in mysticism. Yet another classic case of brain death-induced hallucination. I received emails from former colleagues calling me a traitor. One even said, "You became everything you spent your life fighting against. You sold yourself." Some old students posted videos refuting my reports, cutting out excerpts from my testimony to try to show inconsistencies. A publisher cancelled a publishing contract we had, but none of that shook me. Why, what I experienced was not a theory. It was an existential transformation. I understood the skepticism. I was skeptical. I would have mocked myself if I had heard this story 10 years ago. But now I felt compassion for these reactions. I knew that behind the anger was fear. Afraid it's true, because if it is, then a lot of people will have to reevaluate everything. And that hurts. I know. I lived it. Even so, I started to be invited to podcasts, inter-religious meetings, listening circles, but I also turned down invitations to sensational programs. God didn't bring me back to become a spectacle. I remember an interview with a famous journalist who tried to pressure me. "Don't you think it's dangerous to spread this idea that you saw God?" And I responded calmly, "More dangerous is denying what we experience for fear of what others will think. If my story touches a single life, it's worth it." Faith did not make me arrogant. On the contrary, made me small. It made me dependent. Made me see that all knowledge without love is empty. And even with all the attacks, something kept me firm. Messages from anonymous, simple, real people. A young man who almost took his own life and gave up after hearing my story. A mother who had been crying for months over her son's death, and after watching my video, felt for the first time that he was at peace. A woman wrote to me saying, "I don't believe in God, but after listening to you, I started talking to him. That's it for me. I don't want to create a religion. I don't want followers. I just want people to know that there is something beyond, that you are seen, loved, and that you are not alone. Tonight is night. I'm sitting at the same table where I wrote my first thesis as an atheist. There are still old photos on the wall. Some awards, a letter of recommendation from a famous dean, my diplomas. It all seems so small now. I turn on the camera. It flashes red. I record. This may be the last time I tell this story. Not because I'm leaving, but because I believe that, after that, the message will have done what I needed. I took a deep breath and stared at the lens, as if staring into the soul of someone on the other side. If you've come this far, I want to tell you something. Something that didn't come from me, but that crossed me, healed me, and gave me back to life. Break. You are not a mistake. You are not alone. You were made with purpose. And there is someone, yes, someone, who loves you, with an intensity you can't yet imagine. I close my eyes and let the memory of the light invade me once again. I'm no better than you. I was arrogant, cold, blind, but still, God sought me, and if He sought me, He can and will reach you too. My voice broke, but I continued. If you are living in emptiness, if you think you have reached the end, if you doubt everything, no. It was at that point that I found God. Or rather, it was at that point that He found me. I showed an old photo from the time when I taught that the universe was indifferent, that life was random. Afterwards, I showed a current photo next to a community I welcomed during a talk at a small church in Vermont. People ask me, "Are you sure what you saw?" And I say, more certain than I am now, only when I'm there again. The camera was still recording. The video was still playing. But I felt I had already said the essentials. Before hanging up, I said, "You can believe it or not, but I saw eternity, and it has a name, love." And I ended with a question. What if it's true? If this story touched you in any way, don't let her stop here. Subscribe to the channel right now. It helps me continue spreading life-changing messages. If you reach the end, comment below. I believe there is more. This quote will show that you went all the way and may inspire others to do the same. Leave your like, not just for the video, but for everything it made you feel. This helps this message reach even more hearts. And don't forget, the next video is already appearing here on the screen. Click on it now. The story below might be exactly what you need to hear today.